Actually, we've got a lot of people online. It'll be really interesting, actually, if you want to use the chat box to say where you are, to say your name and where you are. It'd be really great to get a sense of the distribution of people around the island and beyond who are here. Thank you very much for doing that. So look, I'm just going to give a little bit of background before we get into this. We're here because we think there's a real risk that there'll be an effort to permit fracking on the island of Ireland before Christmas, which is why many of the people who've been active on this issue in Ireland and in the US and in the UK have joined together tonight to co-host this meeting. We're going to hear in a few minutes from Diane Little on the ground in Fermanagh, and this meeting is a response to her call for solidarity in the face of this new risk that fracking could be, the door to fracking could be opened on the island. And before we hear from our speakers, including someone rather well known for his greenness, who'll say a few words, I wanted to give you a bit of the background. You may remember that 10 years ago, both governments on this island commissioned a study on the impacts of fracking, which very quickly became evident as being basically to rubber stamp the desirability of fracking, an industry-dominated research, and campaigners in the north in particular dug into the company and their background, and we learned how closely associated with the industry they were. And a campaign to stop that study was formed, and it succeeded in discrediting the study and sidelining it. And campaigning went on both sides of the border. And with a lot of grassroots work in Leitrim and around the Republic in particular, we were successful in having a legal ban on fracking in the Republic that went through our Parliament in 2017. In the north, though, the campaign has continued, and in other parts of these islands across Britain, there's now moratoriums or bans in every part of Britain. But here on this island, we haven't yet got a moratorium or a ban in the north, although all applications have stalled for the last number of years. But what's happening now, though, is that the DUP Minister for the Economy, Gordon Lyons, has done two things of late that are causing real concern. One is he's once again, as was done 10 years ago by his predecessors, commissioned a industry-associated group to do a study on fracking, which, although it hasn't been published, it's been leaked to Extinction Rebellion in the north. And again, it seems to ignore all the public health concerns, all the environment and climate concerns, and looks like could be used to pave the way for a rationale for allowing drilling and fracking and exploratory drilling and fracking in the north, which obviously is a great cause for concern. On top of which, he's now said he intends to bring to the Northern Executive in Stormont before the Christmas recess in 10 days' time, a new policy on petroleum and licensing, which could actually say it's okay to go ahead with this exploratory drilling and fracking. And obviously that's why this is an emergency. This is why we've called at Diane's request and the other campaigners that she works with and coordinates. We have responded by organising this emergency online international solidarity meeting just to draw attention to this issue, because we're pretty sure if the world pays attention, no government in a democratic society would now willingly go ahead with fracking if there's enough attention and enough of a spotlight, and particularly seeing as in the south of Ireland, Sinn Féin are vocally opposed to fracking and promised in the last election that they would be in favour of an all-out ban on fracking, including exploratory drilling across the island. So that's the context of this meeting. We have, in the last few days since the preparations for this meeting began, and thanks to Diane and her colleagues' ongoing campaigning, both the Alliance Party and the Unionist Party, who have one vote each on the 10-person executive, have said they will not allow a policy that would enable fracking to take place. And indeed, they would support one that would actually rule out licensing of petroleum exploration altogether. And so therefore, a lot of spotlight is now on Sinn Féin. They have 3 votes on the executive. If those 3 votes were to say, if Sinn Féin were to say they wouldn't allow this policy to go through, or better still, that they would back a policy to end licensing, the executive would be almost certain to go ahead and do that. So that's why we're particularly focused tonight on the role of Sinn Féin in making sure that fracking doesn't get onto this island, and better still, completing the ban on fracking across the island. So that's the background. And I'm going to start now by inviting Diane from LAMP Fermanagh and Operation Grounded to speak. LAMP Fermanagh is a cross-community partnership, community development and peace building focused partnership in West Fermanagh, and took an interest in fracking because they were in the licensing zone when this first came up 4 or 5 years ago or more. But she's also since then become the coordinator of Operation Grounded, which is cross-border and cross-community groups that are interested in opposing fracking. So she's really at the epicenter of this on the ground, and she's the person to tell us what the risks are and why her community is so concerned about this. Diane, I'll hand over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Oisín, and thank you, everybody, for being here tonight and answering our call for help, across the country and across the water and everywhere that you're joining us from. We're very grateful. We need to be heard, and that's very important at this time. This is an emergency call. We have a very dangerous situation here in Northern Ireland due to the vulnerability of our population here. Tonight, I want you to consider who is in control of this situation. Is there corruption? Is there collusion? What happens to our concerns and the real evidence? And can we get consensus? First off, for those who don't live in Northern Ireland, it is important to understand that we are a post-conflict society. After 35 years of violence, over 3,500 people died here. We have one of the highest rates of post-traumatic stress disorder in the world. We are a population that is at great risk of the fracking industry, who, as we know, not only poison our water, land and air and harm public health, it also divides and creates conflict in our community. The division that we see in areas that have fracking is something we cannot risk here. This industry brings illness, especially discriminating against the health of our women and children. It brings trauma and division and trouble to our community. And it will damage our sustainable and growing successful tourism and agriculture. We need an international spotlight and emergency intervention here now, and we hope that you all will help us. Secondly, when the Minister of Economy commissioned the Hatch research to rubber stamp industry plans, we all knew it was a setup. But we still submitted the health evidence and the important submissions from all of the public health professionals in New York and Pennsylvania, including from lovely Dr. Kathy Nolan, who's very kindly here with us tonight. The department did not require the researchers to have any qualifications in public health. Hatch are oil and gas consultants, and they did not take the public health threats into account. They did not assess our community or the impact on our community. They assessed one drilling scenario as having negligible health impacts. It is deeply concerning that the Hatch report and the limited impacts it identifies are being used to inform policy options being brought to the Northern Ireland Executive to try to justify drilling for oil and gas in 2021. The DUP is the political party in charge of the Department for Economy, which is responsible for oil and gas extraction, licensing and policy options, which they will bring to the Northern Ireland Executive before December 16th. The Executive, often called the Stormont Executive, consists of 5 political parties from different numbers of seats, depending on the size of the party. The DUP have 5 seats, Sinn Féin have 4, the Alliance Party has 1 seat, the SDLP has 1 seat, and Ulster Unionists have 1 seat. Thankfully, both the Alliance and Ulster Unionist parties have both said that they will vote for a policy that will ban petroleum licensing. We need parties to work together to protect people. The Sinn Féin bill to ban does not, that they brought recently to the Assembly, does not ban fracking and comes far too late. Even after 10 years, It eventually came, but it came too close to the elections next year to have any hope of passing into law. Policy made in the executive now is the only way that we can be safe. The reason why this vote on policy on petroleum licensing is so critical is that if the executive were to approve a policy to allow licensing, then they would be legally obliged to vote to approve 2 applications which are waiting approval. One, once the companies have the applications granted, they will be unstoppable because they will have the legal authority to start drilling and could sue the government for billions if the government tries to ban fracking after the applications are granted. The 2 applications are in sensitive hydrological areas. In Fermanagh, a company called Tamboran Resources UK applied for its license in 2016. This is the Lakeland area where we're talking from today, and it consists of Lough Erne waterways, and they're connected into the Shannon waterways, which flow down the full length of Ireland. The other application by EHA Exploration covers 5 council areas of Belfast, Antrim and Newtonabbey, Armagh City and Banbridge, Craigavon and Lisburn, Castlereagh and Mid-Ulster. This area nearby Lough Neagh supplies 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water, especially for the Belfast residents. Failing to ban petroleum licensing in this policy review will be a catastrophe for Northern Ireland. It will lock us into propping up fossil fuel assets for a generation. Northern Ireland is dumping hundreds of millions of fossil fuel assets for a generation. If you were here today and you could see how windy it was, you would understand that we don't need this. So we must go forward, right? We've got millions of pounds worth of genuine energies here. We must go forward, not back. The real evidence of widespread harms is overwhelming, and ministers must follow their code of conduct, follow the precautionary principle if any policy option will bring harm. They must act in the public interest. Lastly, as you can already tell, the Department for Economy is not neutral. They and the utility regulator actually maintain a statutory duty to promote gas. This year, an independent Exeter University report confirmed what we suspected, that the department allows major influence of industry and the private sector in policy making. This department cannot act in the public interest or move forward from gas to renewable energy. Their direction can only be backwards towards licensing a new oil and gas extraction industry, not forward. Despite over 2,000 peer-reviewed studies and reports on fracking's negative impacts to the contrary, this department still claims fracking can be made safe and licenses should be granted. This department and the industry that they facilitate for cannot be allowed to ignore the evidence and undermine democratic process. Ministers must not lock us in to propping up the fossil fuel infrastructure for decades. We can see the gas companies planning to reverse the pipelines out of Northern Ireland, set up big blue hydrogen plants and use gas for that and exploit everything here to supply blue hydrogen and 60% made from gas by 2050 into the UK. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for us to be exploited in this way. We welcome this international spotlight on the Northern Ireland executive ministers to test if they will follow their own party policies and their public commitments during COP and their assembly motion passed in October 2020 to ban petroleum licensing. They can and must intervene now, following the real evidence on the health, environment and climate. the economic devastation of tourism and agriculture, and the long-term public finances. Our only hope is a full and final ban on petroleum licensing now, which can be made by ministers in the executive who will decide petroleum licensing policy before December 16th. We need elected representatives to have courage to reach consensus and stand together against institutional oppression and the human rights violations which we face, which were documented last year by the Irish Centre for Human Rights. A policy that will ban petroleum licensing must be the one and only policy to come out to public consultation. So after 10 years of threat and fighting, all that we value, the threat to all we value will actually come to an end and give the communities here a real peace this Christmas. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Diane. And I can see in the chat box there, and I think I'm sure that person speaks for all of us, that to thank you for, and all your colleagues on the ground, for your tireless campaigning on this issue over the yeast. It equally was true in Leitrim of the campaigners there. It's what kept fracking out of the Republic, and it's what has kept fracking out of the North as well. And it is an inspiration to all of us. Also very clear there what you said, that the promise of legislation to ban fracking, and I don't think I know there's some analysis that the Sinn Féin legislation isn't even comprehensive enough. It doesn't include sandstone, but the promise of legislation that can't pass, has no chance of passing before an election next spring, is kind of useless. It's almost worse than useless right now. It's a distraction, because there's a real risk that a policy could let fracking in right now. So the answer is to at least block any policy that would allow fracking. But as you've said, why not go that step further? If there's enough parties who favour a ban, and achieve that ban right now with a policy that just ends petroleum licensing in general. It couldn't be a more straightforward call to our politicians. Just put in place a policy right now. They have that power to end petroleum licensing. So that's really, really clear and helpful. Thank you, Diane. There will be a chance for questions and answers after the panelists have spoken. So if you do have any questions, if you could use the Q&A function rather than the chat function, because the chat function's catching lots of things along the way and we might lose your question. So if you put them into the Q&A function, we'll try to get to them after the panelists have spoken. But next, I want to introduce someone who needs no introduction, an award-winning actor and long-time anti-fracking activist who, along with Julia and Kathy, speakers later on this panel, was very much involved in the inspiring campaign to ban fracking in New York State, and who's been working with us across the Republic and the North on the issue of fracking since 2015. He advocates for a worldwide ban on fracking, as well as to protect our water and climate and advance renewable energy. Welcome, Mark Ruffalo.
Thank you, Oisín, and thank you, Diane, and thanks for all the folks joining today. You know, we are the ones we've been waiting for. You know, sadly, it comes down to the people, not sadly, actually justifiably, it comes down to us. It comes down to what we do together. It comes down to us coming together and protecting ourselves, protecting our families, protecting our community. I'm coming to you from New York State, where we banned fracking. I started on this journey in 2010. I'm on the traditional lands of the Lenape people, native indigenous people who we fought hand in hand, side by side here to ban fracking. And you know, what I learned was our relationships were the most important thing, and taking care of each other, and that we were all in this together. And that was the beautiful message that came out of this difficult struggle. Now I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this, and I'm actually, my heart is pounding, because I'm reliving a trauma that we were faced with in 2010, when this industry was coming in. You know, they were just going to do some test drills, and they were going to use all the best industry standards, and they were going to save the people and the farms and all of this stuff. It looked really nice and beautiful to us. But what ended up happening was they destroyed our communities. They pit neighbor against neighbor. They made winners and losers. They poisoned people's water. And that's how I was introduced to it. I was asked to go to Dimock, Pennsylvania, which is a couple hours from my home. And I saw 20 people sitting there with folders full of their medical records, pictures of dead animals, pictures of video of their water starting on fire, a bitterness between them and their neighbors, to the point where there was threats of violence. The industry itself was taunting and harassing people who were speaking out against this terrible industrialization. They said they were only going to do a few hundred wells. We came to find out that was 50,000 wells that they had their eyes on. And what I came to understand was almost nothing that came out of their mouths was true. That almost everything they said was a lie. And almost every policy they enacted was one of divisiveness. And it was a bitter fight that we engaged in. And so I want to say to you, just off the bat, from what I'm hearing, is you're being invited into a trap. And it's a trap that's gamed for the people like you to lose. You're being targeted as a sacrificial zone for the rest of Europe. They come into communities that are suffering, that have been exposed to trauma, that are easily divided. They target communities like yours to take advantage of you, and you're directly in their sights right now. And there's a lot of pretty language that they'll use, but ultimately they don't care about you. And I'm telling you this from personal experience, from lived experience. I've seen what it does. And I have friends now in Pennsylvania who still, after almost 20 years, do not have clean water. And the state has turned their back on them. And these agencies that are meant to protect us are actually in employment of the oil and gas industry. They're captured agencies. So this agency that is supposed to be protecting you is actually a captured agency. They're actually, at the same time, they're supposed to be protecting you. They're actually supposed to be getting these licenses out to people. So from what I understand and what's going on, this is all going to come down to Sinn Féin now. And the head of Sinn Féin was just recently in New York. I wish that we could have let her come to tour the devastation of Pennsylvania. It's too bad she didn't take the time with such an important issue to actually educate herself and actually go to the places where it's happening. Now, we banned fracking here, and not with the fracking ban bill that we hope that you guys could have some sort of ban there too. I mean, that's what we're talking about. This industry is sneaky. Now, once you let the camel's nose into the tent, the entire industry follows, and then you've lost. These licenses are a ploy to pry their way into your communities. It's just a ploy. And that's why it's so important that groups like us, and we come together to get today. And we say that we're not going to fall for false promises from our politicians. It's just not going to happen. So we need to keep our eye on the prize. Ban the petroleum licenses, and the companies can't apply for the permits. And this nightmare that communities in Northern Ireland have been dealing with, of having this threat hanging over their heads, can stop. Now, here are a few thoughts that Sinn Féin and all the political parties need to understand. And I already went over some of this. Fracking divides communities, and that is the last thing that our brothers and sisters in Northern Ireland need right now. Now, I don't have to tell any of you that. And water does not observe borders. If fracking pollutes the water supply in Ireland, it will travel south. There are scientific reports that show definitively, Kathy Nolan will talk about them, that these underwater aquifers travel as much as 50 miles. And in the area near Belfast, where there's a drilling and fracking application, it supplies, like Diane said, 40% of the drinking water of Northern Ireland. Now, please get on the phones, call Sinn Féin, call your MLAs and make sure that the executive votes to ban the petroleum licenses and stops fracking once and for all on your beautiful island. Let's move forward. Let's not move back. We have this beautiful fossil-free economy future ready for us to take. I want to thank the fossil fuel industry for bringing us to this place. Thank you. Thank you very much. But now it's time for us to take the technology, to take what we've built, to take the beautiful minds and scientists and thinkers that can take us beyond the fossil fuel era. We're there now. So step aside, fossil fuel industry, and let us have the future that is rightfully belongs to our children from the work that so many people put into moving away from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, very much. We can't, because this is one of these strange online experiences we're all used to now. You can't hear the applause, but I'm sure the chat box, actually I can see the chat box is responding. I'm not going to try to summarize what you so eloquently expressed there around the impact fracking has and the chance we have to get beyond it now and to a much brighter fossil-free future. I am going to repeat, though, the call to action that you mentioned there, which is to contact your local elected Sinn Féin representative in the first instance. Everywhere in this island now, pretty much, people have elected Sinn Féin representatives, either MLAs in Northern Ireland or TDs here in the Republic. And although they're getting they're getting blasted away by the chat, my colleague Deirdre, who's behind the bagel there, logo, is putting in the websites where you can find the contact details of either your local TD in the Republic or your MLA in the North. And we are focusing tonight on inviting people to call, because someone asked about, is there a template email? We may develop that later in the week. But if you've taken the time to come here tonight, we really want to ask you to pick up the phone, because we know that that's 10, 20, 30 times more powerful than a template email. If you could take the 3 or 4 minutes to ring your local Sinn Féin elected representative, and it doesn't have to be, you don't need to be an expert. Everything you've heard so far tonight is more than enough. It's just to say they must use their votes to block any policy that would allow fracking in Northern Ireland. And let's go one better and use the chance we have to put in place a ban on petroleum licensing in the North as soon as possible. It's as simple as that. If you just say who you are and why you're calling, and that's it, that you're very concerned and you want to see an end to fracking now, that's all you need to say. And if there's 225 of us on this call tonight, if 150 of us or 200 of us or all of us tomorrow can ring the offices of our local Sinn Féin representative, they will know about it, and our chances of winning this before Christmas will increase hugely. So that's the call to action we'll return to before the end. And thank you again very much, Mark. Mark's going to stay with us as long as he can. He may need to leave before the end, but we're very grateful for your time and indeed for your activism on this over many years. I'm going to turn now to one of your colleagues from New York, and that's Kathy Nolan, who is from Concerned Physicians, Health Physicians of New York, and Physicians for Social Responsibility, who again, like Mark and Julia, was very involved in the campaign to ban fracking in New York State, and will now talk to us a little bit about that experience and about the risks of fracking. Over to you, Kathy.
Thank you very much, Oisín, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm a physician and a pediatrician, and also a proud Irish American. And Mark Ruffalo is exactly right. What we did here in New York was actually something similar to what we're calling for Northern Ireland, where in New York, we banned fracking essentially by not allowing permits, or in your case, licenses. And it was 7 years later before we actually got a legislative ban in New York State to back that up. But we had zero fracking during that interval because the industry couldn't get the permits. My work has primarily been with the groups Concerned Health Professionals of New York and Physicians for Social Responsibility in New York. We're the compilers of the Compendium of Scientific, Medical, and Media Findings demonstrating risks and harms of fracking. And we put that together because we felt like people needed to know what these activities actually do. We're now in the 8th edition preparation. The first 7 editions have compiled over 2,000 entries. that are primarily peer-reviewed articles and also data about this industry. The science here is now very solid. You can find that 7th edition document at concernedhealthny.org. And I'll just give you the highlights. Over this decade of research that's been growing and growing, there has been no evidence brought forward to show that fracking can be conducted safely. It has devastating health impacts, particularly for women, children, and other vulnerable populations. It has immediate, almost universal air pollution associated with it and the resulting health problems. It has immediate, almost universal light and noise pollution and other psychosocial stressors that are brought into communities when the industry comes in. It has sometimes immediate and sometimes long-term contamination of water supplies, sometimes nearby, and now we increasingly know possibly in distant water sources. There are increased risk of cancer and birth defects in people living near the wells, which makes sense because we've known that workers in the industry have some of those same health effects. And there's the unpredictable and potentially uncontrollable side effect of earthquake activity. I hesitate to call it a side effect because this is actually an industry that relies on exploding our underground rock structures that are supposed to be our solid base. Now, the risk of these impacts varies with the area and with the topography, which is why I called for conducting a detailed site-specific health impacts analysis before even considering any licenses. But that's what would be needed if you want to go forward. Mitigating these risks is actually very straightforward. You just don't allow these activities. And that is the precautionary principle. And that makes sense. And that's really how you protect people from all of this horrible constellation of impacts. So your decision makers are faced with a yes or no decision. Really support the moribund oil and gas industry by allowing them into Northern Ireland, or support the people and the land of Northern Ireland by not allowing any licenses for petroleum activities. I really hope you'll do what we were able to get leaders to do in New York State and protect the people and the lands. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kathy, for such a clear and succinct exposition of the health impacts of fracking and the clarity of the reasons for why we shouldn't go ahead with it. And you know, it's such a real support to campaigners on the ground when there's real expertise and expert analysis available that proves the case that campaigners want to make. So thank you so much for your work and for being here this evening. I'm going to hand over to my colleague in Belfast, Friends of the Earth Director in Northern Ireland, James Orr, to give the perspective of an NGO, environmental campaigning NGO in the North. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Oisín, and really thank you, Kathy, for that summary there. This is about protecting people, the land, and the water. And I want to go off piste here and say something I didn't expect to say, particularly after what Mark was saying about the devastating impact on communities. At the weekend, an earth protector called Grandad Billy Newman died, and he was at the forefront of campaigning against unconventional oil and gas drilling at Woodburn Forest. Billy was one of those really unassuming people. He was supported by his family, he was supported by his grandchildren, and he knew exactly what Mark was saying, that there's systemic failure here. We can't trust these companies. They will poison us to death. They are predators, and they will come in and they will use any means, including, as you say, Diane, you know, collusion, malfeasance, corruptions to get their way. So an absolute tribute to people like Grandad Billy, because they motivated me, you know, and that idea that Mark was saying as well, that yeah, you know, we in a way, in a bizarre, sick way, have to thank them because they can unite communities. They can bring divided communities together to realize that what's really important is our land or our water. So I'm sorry for going off piece on that. I suppose that brings me to another point, which is that we can't let our public health and our ecosystems be the victims of a peace process. We've seen in many countries across the world who have gone through conflict that we can't let a peace process usher in a new wave of conflict and violence. And that's where the oil and gas industries really come in, because they sell us to the highest bidders across the world. And Northern Ireland can't be open for that type of business, for extractivist industries. We're calling for a regenerative economy, farming, tourism, an energy policy based on energy efficiency, renewable energy of the right scale, the right place, the right time, community-owned energy, and an end to extractivism. And shout out to many of the other organizations in this call who are opposing those. Okay, I'll come back to the point then, and I know this is what I was meant to reiterate, and thankfully Oisín and others have mentioned this as well. So we expect the DUP to vote for the oil and gas industry, and when it comes to the executive, probably before Christmas. And we expect that decision to be any day now. The Ulster Unionists and SLP have stated they will not support petroleum licensing alliance, and this is a very dynamic situation, so they will vote against. That's only 3 votes. That's only 3 votes within the executive. And by not supporting, that means that certain parties could actually abstain or even not turn up. So that's why, you know, with 3 ministers, the executive table is against DUP's more. We're relying more than ever on Sinn Féin. It's the second biggest party in the executive. It's Sinn Féin who have a policy, an all Ireland policy, to oppose new fossil fuel infrastructure. But that policy needs to be turned into reality very, very quickly. What I want to say is that if there's a policy option being brought before the executive that doesn't include an option to close and cease petroleum license, then that process must be rejected by Sinn Féin. Secondly, at the Northern Ireland Executive, we're asking Sinn Féin not just to say they're against it, you know, that's not good enough. They need to block and stop all petroleum licensing, all hydrocarbon exploration and extraction. And surely Sinn Féin can come up with a strategy with the smaller parties to use their majority position in this to orchestrate a block and stop policy at the executive. That's all we're asking. And let's not be distracted by something else that happened last Monday, which is the first stage of a fracking bill. As Diane mentioned, you know, that bill only mentions oil and gas in shale rocks. If you look at Tamboran's exploration in Fermanagh, Tamboran are looking at sandstones. If you look at what's happening in Lough Neagh, they're prospecting for coal bed methane. So the fracking bill won't actually ban fracking. Yeah, the fracking bill won't actually ban fracking. And there's virtually no time in the assembly business to get this through anyway. So at the very least, we expect from Sinn Féin the same policy and the same procedure that happens in the South. So the issue is urgent, the issue is immediate, and we need to get Sinn Féin to act anytime. Now, there's something else maybe I want to mention, and I know we don't have a lot of time, and that's the new energy policy, which is coming before the executive any day now. It's meant to lead us on the pathway to a cleaner, greener future, to plan our way out of our reliance on dirty fossil fuels, to support the climate, the earth, to support communities, young people who are all demanding a strong climate act and decent energy policy. What we don't want to see, and what we're beginning to see, is another smokescreen, another greenwashing agenda. So first of all, be careful of blue hydrogen expansion. It's intimately connected with supporting the gas industry. We need green hydrogen, not dirty hydrogen. So look at the figures that Diane has mentioned. The extension of the gas network only helped big agri-corporations to the west. It doesn't get people out of fuel poverty. These big agri-giants are the ones who are pushing this industry here, and it makes fuel poverty worse. I know someone come up in the chat box there about Shannon LNG. We must oppose that. We must oppose the gas caverns project in Larne and the Coghlan Point oil terminal in Whitehead as well. We can't let the gas industry come through the back door or the front door with this so-called energy policy. I just want to thank everybody as well. You know, too long we've had international attention, Northern Ireland on the bad stuff. I think this is actually attention on the good stuff, and it's fantastic to see people focusing on our health, our landscapes, our climate, our ecology. And maybe we have matured a little bit, that this international tension is no longer about political violence, but about real peace and the rights of the communities and the rights of nature. So thanks very much, Oisín.
Thanks, James. That's great. And thank you for, I know there were some questions in the chat box about why the focus on Sinn Féin. I think you explained really clearly why without them we don't have the votes to block the DUP proposal, and with them we have the votes not just to block it, but potentially to actually bring forward an effective ban, not just on fracking, but on all petroleum exploration right away. So that is why the focus. Of course, we need all parties to be called upon and advocated. Just that Diane's already succeeded with 3 of them, so she's looking for our help with the one that should be straightforward about this. They have an all-island policy very clearly to ban all fracking and all drilling, exploratory otherwise. So it should be straightforward that they just implement that on both sides of the border with equal vigor. And that's what we're calling on them to do tonight. Our final speaker, before we try to answer some of your questions, some of the questions are being answered by people like myself and other panelists typing in the Q&A box. So if you have a question, do look back at the Q&A box and do put your questions in there. But we will try to get back to some of them in person before the end of the session. We're hoping to be out of here by 7 at the latest, or very shortly afterwards. Anyway, the last but not least is Julia Walsh, who is the co-founder and director of Frack Action New York, and who I think it's fair to say is an amazing campaigner and catalyst and convener and prober and pusher at all hours of the day and night across multiple continents. And I don't think I'd be here this evening if it wasn't for you, Julia. And so and I'm delighted that you have brought us together and are helping us to beat a path to a brighter future. So let's hear from you.
Well, thanks so much. And thanks to all the organizers of the event, to all the organizers like Diane, who have been fighting tirelessly for over 10 years now, and to the hundreds of people who have joined this call. It's a beautiful evening to be together over there. And I'm also a proud Irish American like Dr. Kathy Nolan. And I'm coming to you from the Lenape lands in what is now New York State. I just wanted to highlight a few points and then we can get over to the questions. Really just want to offer some encouraging words here to so many of you on this Zoom and many who will watch it after, that this has been a hard fought victory to stop fracking for this long throughout the island of Ireland. The industry has been coming at Ireland for many years now to exploit it. And you all have done an incredible job of protecting that beautiful island and the land that I really love. And I'm so grateful to have a little role in this because I know how special and sacred that land is. And, right now we're just down to the wire, and the industry is really trying to force this down the government's throat. And the DUP and the Minister of Economy, Gordon Lyons, is definitely doing the bidding of this industry. I just want to reiterate the fact that after the study was stopped in the All Island study years ago, they knew that they didn't have the justification to move forward. And it was the DUP minister who moved this forward in the recent year to get another study that was incredibly flawed. And all of the local residents made their comments, they participated. And even though they knew this was going to be flawed and saw the writing on the wall of what this was, and the government received the Hatch researchers' report and then refused to give it to the communities that had publicly commented. And it was only because what was most likely a government person in Stormont leaking the Hatch report to Extinction Rebellion that we even have a copy of that report. And that is the report that they are going to try to use to justify the petroleum licensing policy that will then open the gates to the existing permits from Tambourne and the other company for Fermanagh and that area by Belfast, that 5-city council area. So they're trying to really rush this through. Gordon Lyons has said that December 16th is his deadline. He wants to get it in before Christmas. And we just all need to work together, you know, for these next 2 weeks to say, hell no, you are not going to ram this down these communities' throats. You are not going to frack and drill in Northern Ireland. You are not going to pollute the water. You are not going to poison the people, and you are not going to further divide Northern Ireland. And together we can do that. We have done this. We've done this before. We've stopped fracking in the Republic. We've stopped import of fracked gas from our homelands here in the US to Ireland. We have the opportunity now to stand together, to stand arm in arm with Diane and all of the people in the North and make sure that Ireland, the whole island of Ireland's water, is safe and protected for your children and for the children of all of the life that depends on it, not just the humans, but all of the life. And so, you know, with that, I just wanted to say that, again, this water knows no boundaries. 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water is in one of the licensed areas. And in Fermanagh, the Shannon River is also there, as well as all the drinking water for those folks, which travels through the mother river of the island. I do remember the story, and I don't know if I'll be able to say it in an eloquent way, but when we were out there in 2015, we got invited after we banned fracking in New York to come and share our health report that our health professionals in the state had produced to say that fracking was not safe enough for here. We wanted to say it's not safe enough for there or anywhere, and we shared that. We went up to the area where Tambourne had tried to do an exploratory well in Fermanagh, and there was a lock the gate protest that went on. I believe it was for many weeks, if not months. And at the end of the day, they were able to stop that exploratory well by uniting the community together. And I just remember standing there, both in complete horror of this gate that had barbed wire fence and you know, all the signs, and thinking of all the people who just sat there in their lawn chairs and were going to physically block and get arrested if the equipment had come through. And it was this beautiful moment where it was a kind of interfaith group that was there, Protestant, Catholic, all different people from all different walks of life. And they were singing, I believe it was Amazing Grace. And at that moment, they found out that the permit had been blocked and a big rainbow came out over the sky. And you know, I think that's going to be our future too for the fracking ban in Northern Ireland. So let's keep it up and keep it going. And we're with you arm in arm here. This is an international movement, and appreciate everybody on the call. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Julia. You are, when it comes to campaigning, you are a force of nature, and nature is very lucky to have you on her side. And we are very grateful actually for the solidarity from Irish America on this issue, and from America more generally. I'm surprised we haven't found you an Irish relation yet, Mark. We found an 8th cousin for Barack Obama. I'm sure we can find one for you. But it is really helpful to have. It has been since the beginning, and it's why we are now also here campaigning to prevent the import of fracked gas, not because it would be absurdly hypocritical to ban fracking here and then import fracked gas, but particularly from under the feet of the communities in Pennsylvania who showed us such solidarity when the communities in Leitrim and Fermanagh were campaigning against Tambourne a number of years ago. So we are continuing to fight that good fight, and we're delighted to do that with you. And there's definitely scope. You mentioned, Mark, if we'd known about Mary Lou, we could have invited her to Pennsylvania last week. Irish politicians love going to the US around Patrick's Day. Maybe there's a role for Irish America to make sure that they are invited to Pennsylvania then. Our former Taoiseach Enda Kenny went 10 years ago at the behest of the governor, I think, and surveyed the fracking lands and said, I want this for Ireland, is what he said then. Now we beat that back, but it's time with the new dispensation here where fracking is banned to maybe use that reality in the US to push for the proper ban on not just imports, but on fossil fuel infrastructure here in general, because of the contribution that will make to the communities around the world and to the movement around the world. So it doesn't end tonight by any means, or even at this Christmas if we win this battle. We have only about 5 minutes left before we need to finish. There's lots of questions and answers now coming in, which we've been trying to answer some of them, but I'm going to ask is particularly Diane, perhaps, and then maybe Julia again, aren't you, James? If there's some of those questions that you would like to come back on, particularly Diane, you spoke early on, but if you've seen any of those questions that you think it would be useful for you to come back on this. There's people asking about the DUP. There's a whole rake of them. Sorry, there's one I was going to bring your attention to. Yeah, there was actually somebody asking about whether companies might have the right to sue if they are denied drilling. So I don't know, Diane, do you want to come back on any of the questions that are in the chat box, or anybody else indeed?
I can direct questions into two Facebook pages. Belcoo Frack Free is one of them. Excellent. Tom White, excellent expert there. It's like an encyclopedic knowledge of everything. We rely heavily on him, and also Eddie in the South as well, to keep us right. And yes, they've already threatened to sue for billions, and that's, we had a terrible scandal here called RHI, and really we don't want to go back to that. But I'm very conscious that Mark Ruffalo is still with us, and I am sure that everybody would really like to hear in the last few minutes from Mark, because we are so grateful to him giving us the time to do this, and obviously attracting the audience in to hear, when he's listened to Julia and he's listened to everybody. What do you think of this situation, Mark? Let's hear from you, at the end.
I mean, it's so beautiful. I mean, it's so easy to get isolated and to feel alone and to feel overwhelmed and to start to lose hope and feel beat. But that's how they want us to feel. And like when we come together like this, we have such immense power, and it doesn't take a lot of people. I mean, really, New York, there was a lot of people that came out, but there were really dark moments along the way, like that we were sure that we were beaten, and we just held together and we held on to each other, and we we prayed and we kept fighting, and I came up with something for myself. It's like, if you're losing hope, you're not doing enough, and that became my sort of mantra. And when we come together, we win, and we'll win ultimately. You already won.
Have you a message for Mary Lou McDonald? Have you a message for Sinn Féin? Have you a message for Mary Lou McDonald? You missed her in New York. Send a message to Mary Lou there.
Mary Lou, don't make the mistake that so many politicians went down on here in New York and Pennsylvania. I mean, it's destroyed so many careers. The outcome is always bad, and it will always be on your shoulders. And that means on the legacy of your name and your family's name. Now, you might get rich, some of your friends might get rich, but all the money in the world doesn't do anything to stop the amount of pain and suffering that will be put upon the people that are going to be forced to live with this on the front lines. And that money that you get, or the friends that you get, will be poisonous money. you'll never be able to enjoy it the way you think you might. And Pete Seeger said a great thing in the beginning of all this. Someone said, well, what about the economy, Pete? You know, we were up there in the state building here in Albany with Pete Seeger in the very early days of trying to ban this. And you know what he said? He said, yeah, you don't take your daughters to the red light district just because they can make a quick buck there. And it always reminds me of these moments, you know, because it's always a quick buck that someone's trying to make. And when you're trying to make a quick buck, that means someone else is getting screwed. And so I'd say to you, Mary Lou, don't be the one doing the screwing here. Your people don't want this. We're moving on. You're way ahead of us. We didn't have half of the information you do now. And we said no. And so I hope you do the right thing, sister, because I know you got a heart in you, and I know you got family, and I know you got people that you care about, and I know you got people in that constituency that you care about. Do the right thing for them, kid. Do the right thing, and then have heaven smile on you when you go up to the pearly gates.
We'll adopt you. We will be your Irish relations.
All right, you are my relations.
Nick Ruffalo. We'll call him Nick Ruffalo.
Nick Ruffalo.
Okay.
So we could be here for another 2 hours with all the questions and energy there is in the room, but we're not going to do better than Mark and Pete Seeger. So I'm going to call this now at 7 o'clock as we originally planned.
Can I just get a final word too? Sorry, on just to ask everyone to check out also NI farmersagainstfracking.org. That has a editorial that was written that really summarizes all this information that was in Farming Life last week, and also just encourage everyone to contact your Sinn Féin.
We will have a recording of this, and we will send it to those who registered, and we'll send it to our wider support group as well. And just, there was some people asking there, like if they're ringing, there's been so much information, if they're ringing Sinn Féin tomorrow, like what's the elevator pitch? And I do think it's as simple as there's all the reasons against fracking, but for me, campaigning is about getting politicians to promise something and then holding them to it. And they have promised to ban fracking, a total ban across the island of Ireland, including exploratory drilling. That could not have been clearer. They are the exact words. I can't believe I was on mute for that. Sorry, after all this time, I should know better. I've just put into the chat box the lines that Sinn Féin put in their manifesto last year, because people were asking, after all the information, for a summary of what to say if they're ringing their Sinn Féin representatives at the head office tomorrow. Because there's a lot.
Will I take that, Oisín, in terms of what to say to the because that's really important, okay? We're not asking for a ban on fracking. It's too late for a ban on fracking. They're not going to ban fracking. They're only going to put it in the shale. We need a ban in the policy that they're forming in the executive. Petroleum licensing policy options are coming into the executive now, and it's the ban. We're going to need a ban on petroleum licensing policy to be the policy when they review the policy. And that's very important. It's about a policy review so that no more petroleum licenses are issued. That's what we need.
And they have promised no drilling, exploratory or otherwise. So it is in line with what they've promised. And this is about getting them to deliver. It's as simple as that. And this is the moment to do it. So look, thank you all, everyone, so much for coming out tonight. And thank you to all our speakers for giving their time. We can win this, as has been said, and we can win it quickly if we put the pressure on in the coming days. And then we go on to the next stage of the struggle. Thank you all very much. Cheers. And